She was standing at her window again. I noticed it the same way I noticed everything about Nora Hale. Too late, too clearly, and in a way I could not walk back. Third floor, second window from the left. She was holding a mug in both hands the way people do when they are cold but do not want to admit the apartment has a heating problem. Her curtain was half drawn. She was not looking at the street. She was looking at my window. And when she realized I had caught her, she did not look away. She mouthed 2 words. "Come over." I stood in my own kitchen with my coffee going cold and thought, that is either nothing or it is everything, and I have absolutely no business hoping it is everything. My name is Daniel Carr. I am 34 years old. I do restoration work, old furniture mostly. People bring me chairs that belong to their grandmothers, and I make them look like the grandmother is still sitting in them. It is the kind of job that sounds romantic in description and involves a lot of sandpaper and silence in practice. I live alone. I like it. I had always told myself I liked it. Nora Hale moved into the apartment across the courtyard 8 months ago. I knew she was a graphic designer because I saw her laptop screen one morning, open to something with color palettes and a deadline banner across the top. I knew she kept odd hours because her light was on past midnight, 4 nights out of 7. I knew she owned exactly one plant, a small, tragic-looking succulent, on her windowsill, and that she spoke to it when she thought no one was watching. I am not proud of how much I knew. I am less proud of how I knew it. The how was simple. Her window faced mine, and I had, apparently, developed a habit. We had met properly exactly once. 3 weeks after she moved in, we ended up at the building's side entrance at the same moment, both carrying groceries, the door requiring a key card neither of our hands was free enough to produce. We stood there performing that polite shuffle where 2 strangers try to solve the same problem simultaneously and only make it worse. She laughed first. It was a short laugh, practical, the kind that says I acknowledge this situation is absurd without committing to enjoying it. She got the door. I held it. She said thank you without looking back. I thought about that laugh for longer than was reasonable. After that, we had what I would describe as a hallway relationship, 2 or 3 times a week, passing between the lift and our respective floors. She always had her headphones in, but one ear free, which I had decided meant something and which probably meant nothing. She nodded. I nodded. Occasionally, one of us said something brief about the weather or the lift being slow. Once she told me the building's laundry room flooded on Tuesdays, and I should plan accordingly. I said thank you. She nodded and disappeared around the corner. I thought, she is efficient. I thought she does not waste words. I thought she has a laugh like someone who has forgotten she is allowed to use it. I was, by any reasonable measure, in trouble. The succulent on her windowsill, the small, losing one, had a name. I found this out 4 months in, when I was on my balcony with a book I was not reading, and she was on hers with her phone pressed to her ear. She said, and I will quote directly, "Gerald is getting worse, and I think it is my fault because I keep forgetting to rotate him toward the light." There was a pause. Then, yes, my succulent. His name is Gerald. Don't. I set my book down. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Gerald became a recurring reference in my internal accounting of Nora Hale. The state of Gerald was, I noticed, tied to her stress levels. Gerald looked pale the week of what I assumed was a difficult deadline. Gerald tilted dangerously in the direction of the window during a stretch where her light stayed on past 2 a.m. 3 nights running, I had no rational explanation for why I had started monitoring a stranger's succulent as an emotional weather report. I blamed Gerald. He had poor survival instincts, and apparently so did I. So, the window. That morning, I stood in my kitchen for 30 seconds. Then I put my cold coffee in the microwave, told myself I was a functioning adult, and went. She answered before I knocked. That was the first thing. She had the door open before my hand reached it, which meant she had been watching, which meant she had watched me the whole way across the courtyard. She was wearing a paint-stained shirt, graphite and a smear of something yellow, and she was holding Gerald. He's dying. She said, not hello, not good morning. I've tried everything, and he keeps getting worse, and my sister says I should just let him go, but I've had him for 2 years, and I don't know. I looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back with the quiet dignity of a plant that had made peace with circumstance. Overwatering, I said. She blinked. What? Most people think succulents die from neglect. They usually die from too much attention. I paused. The roots need to dry out between watering. He's been sitting in wet soil. Then at me, her expression went through something I could not fully read. Relief, and then something underneath the relief that she tucked away before I could identify it. I've been killing him with care, she said. Most things survive neglect better than they survive well-meaning damage. That's either about the plant or it's about something else, she said. It's about the plant, I said. That was not entirely accurate. I said it anyway. She let me in. Her apartment was the mirror image of mine. Same layout, entirely different character. There were color swatches taped to one wall in rows. Some circled, some crossed out. A whiteboard with a timeline covered in shorthand I could not decode. The coffee table had 4 mugs on it, all at different levels, none in a matching set, and a sketchbook open to a page full of small, precise drawings of hands. Not dramatic hands, just hands. Holding things, reaching for things. One hand, drawn in heavier lines than the others, pressed flat against glass. I did not stare at the sketchbook. I looked at Gerald. I repotted him in a terracotta pot she found under her sink, still in the original packaging, the kind you buy meaning to use and then don't. I showed her the soil and how to check moisture and where to place him so the light came from one direction only, and he did not have to work against himself. She watched. She did not speak for most of it, which I had learned, in the small vocabulary of Nora Hale, meant she was paying close attention. When it was done, she said, "You know a lot about keeping things alive. Mostly I know about what happens when you don't." She looked at me. Her fingers tightened once around her mug. "I saw you reading on your balcony," she said. "Months ago, you had the same book 3 different times. It's a good book. You weren't reading it." She said, "You were holding it." I could have said something light. I have a reliable collection of deflections, and I have deployed them in exactly this kind of moment before. I looked at Nora Hale with paint on her shirt, and Gerald newly repotted between us and thought about all the mornings I had made coffee and stood at my window and told myself the view was the thing I was looking at. "No," I said. "I wasn't." She heard that. I watched her hear it. She set her mug down too carefully. She looked at the window, not at the view, at the glass itself. And then she looked back at me and she said very quietly, "I changed the name in my phone." I waited. "When you moved in, I saved you as Guy across the courtyard." "Which is fine. That's just practical." She stopped. "2 months ago, I changed it." "To what?" The silence had a shape to it. Then she said, "I changed it to your name, just your name. No qualifier. Nothing to remind me that you were just the person who happened to live across from me." She looked at me. I noticed I'd done it and I thought about changing it back and I didn't. That sentence did something quiet to the room. I stood up from my crouch over Gerald. She was close, not dramatically close, just the distance that a small apartment produces naturally. And I said, because I had learned from a winter of missed opportunities that I was no longer interested in the version of myself that let these moments pass. I could go. If this is too much, we can go back to nodding in the hallway and I'll pretend you just needed plant help. "I've been watching your window for 8 months, she said. "I know." A pause. "I've been watching yours." "I know," she said. I had expected it to be larger than this. I had expected the moment to feel like weather, like something arriving. Instead, it felt like something that had been there all along, simply no longer requiring us to pretend otherwise. She laughed, that short, practical laugh, and then something in it went different, went softer, and she set her hand on the edge of the counter between us, and I covered it with mine. We stood like that for what was probably 30 seconds and felt like a different unit of measurement entirely. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression collapsed into something human and slightly incredulous. "My sister wants to know if Gerald survived." She held up the screen. The message read, "Did you kill the plant yet?" I laughed. I had not planned to, but I did. And she laughed with me. And just like that, we were 2 people in a small apartment with a newly repotted succulent and coffee going cold on the counter, which is both the least romantic sentence I know how to write and the most accurate. 3 months later, she moved Gerald to the windowsill on my side, the window that faced her apartment, so he can see where he came from, she said. I did not point out that succulents do not have the cognitive infrastructure for nostalgia. I let her have it. A year after that, she stopped keeping 2 separate apartments worth of coffee mugs. Years later, when people asked how we started, she always told the story better than I did. She said he saw me watching from my window, and instead of pretending not to notice, he just came over. And people always said, "That's it." And she always said, "That was it. He came over." Some people spend years waiting for a bigger moment. He just walked across the courtyard. I would say she left out the part where I diagnosed her dying succulent, and it was deeply unglamorous. She would say she didn't leave it out. She just knew which part mattered. Gerald is still alive, which neither of us entirely expected. He sits in the window now with the light coming from one direction only, no longer working against himself. I know the feeling. What would you have done if you caught someone watching you from their window and they mouthed, "Come over"? And have you ever realized too late that the person you had been waiting for had been right across from you all along? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.